as I was saying, you go to school, public school, the public is paying for it, right? And we do so through taxes. There's an acronym called TNSTAFL. TNSTAFL. And each letter represents a word. TNSTAFL, which is there is no such thing as a free lunch. So if a politician says we're going to give you free medicine, we're going to give you free education, we're going to give you free this, free that, right? No, what they're going to do is they're going to take the money, because I don't work for free, do I? No, I do not. Like if you're going to get free education and I'm working at a school, I get paid for it. So where does that money come from? It comes from the taxes. And where does the taxes come from? Who do the taxes come from? They come from you, okay? Now you may not know that and you may not see that, but that's where it goes. But imagine this, you're paying your taxes. Imagine now you're paying taxes for a school you attended, right? And you will pay those taxes till the day you die. Now imagine paying just for the private school. You pay until the what? Tuition's paid for. And once it's paid for, you stop paying. Your medical bills, you pay till the bills are paid for, then you stop paying. But when the government pays for it, no, you're paying for everybody's medical bills now, and you will pay forever. Okay? So there's a big push for this, quote, free stuff, because people don't understand that it is not free. It is something you will pay for the rest of your life. And when they say the rich will pay for it, well, no. The rich will pay some of it, and you will pay some of it. These taxes get spread out through consumption, through your goods, through your sales taxes, through taxes on gas. You know, when you pay at the pump, a lot of that price is taxes. It's not gas. You're paying for some guy's school, okay? Well, let's go back to the French and Indian War, where England racks up, you know, a huge debt because they spent a lot of money fighting a war. Now they're going to say, well, we got to pay for this thing, and how are we going to do so? Well, they start taxing the colonists, and the colonists don't like that. And there are new ideas floating around, philosophical ideas floating around, and they have to do with rights, natural rights. I put up a video by Hadley Arkes, very awesome scholar, okay? Good constitutional scholar, philosopher, and just brilliant man. I highly suggest his work. He's got a book called Beyond the Constitution, and the one that is probably the most famous is a book called First Things. It's a really thick book, but it's definitely well worth reading. And that started a periodical called First Things. After they read that book, they said, we have to write more on this stuff. And they started like a little political theory magazine, and it's called First Things. Really good. Well, I put it's a 5-minute lecture thing of his. It's not gonna blow your, it might blow your mind, but it's not gonna make you, stay there forever, okay? All right, so these new ideas are floating around about natural law, this idea that the God of nature, God, the creator, has created us with certain unalienable rights, which make us, we are equal, okay? And because we're equal, we all have equal rights, the equal right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now that those principles, as I stated last time we met, were not fully exemplified by our founding fathers. They were fallible men, but they did set forth the principles that when applied, our nation became not perfect, but more perfect, okay? Now, what ends up happening is these ideas are spreading, the taxes are going up, the people are getting upset, and the colonists broken into two real groups, loyalists and kind of the rebellious nature, these radicals, we'll call them. These guys are determining whether or not they would like independence. One of the things they're doing is corresponding with the king, and one of the things that happens is the king even just refuses to read one of the letters they send him. But tensions rise, and there's a fight over whether or not they should declare independence without even having a constitution. And what emerges in this time is the Articles of Confederation. Now, the Articles of Confederation, does anybody know anything about them? Have you heard about the Articles of Confederation?
Mm-hmm.
You have. Can you tell me what they are?
It was like the first constitution.
You were correct. I mean, that's the way I was going to say it. It's the first Constitution of the United States of America. And as a matter of fact, the first thing it states is that the name of this country now, this union we'll call it, is the United States of America. Now, what needs to be understood is when it writes it as the United States, it is not like the term the United States. It is the sentence united, little united, not capitalized united, okay? It's not, okay? It's the states that are united. Does that make sense? It's not the United States of America, the USA, you know, the country, right? So there's still a sense of independence that the states share, that they possess, each one of them, from one another. They are not in a tight union yet. One of their biggest fears was going from one form of government that was tyrannical, and I put the list up there on the board last time, right, Jason?
Yep.
And I'll put that back up for you, okay? They didn't want to go from one form of tyranny to another. And so they were worried about giving too much power to the central government and losing power from themselves. And so the Articles of Confederation are generally a very weak form of government. They had the powers that the Articles of Confederation had were generally unenforceable, and nobody wanted to be the president because that would be seen as giving up power. It's almost like being a delegate to the UN or whatever. I mean, what power does the UN have over individual countries, right? It's kind of irrelevant, as George Bush referred to it back before we went to war against Iraq. All right, but we have this Articles of Confederation, and it is not working. Can't tax, and if you're going to fight a war, you need what? That's right, you got to pay your troops, right? Britain was even paying farmers in America for food, grain, and all that stuff, and our American troops couldn't pay for that. And so that was a big deal. And so there was a need for a new constitution. And so this new constitution, when they make it, the preamble states, right, in order to form a more perfect union, right? What is meant by that? More perfect than what? Than what we have right now, the Articles of Confederation, because they clearly were not perfect. Now, what was the Constitution created for? Now, there's a couple ways we can go with this. First, we have to talk about the Declaration of Independence. So if these framers have declared independence from Britain, and if they've declared independence from Britain, they did so for a reason, but they did so on certain principles. What was the first principle that they stated? All men are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights, such as the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted amongst men to secure these rights. Makes sense? When governments become destructive of these ends, it is the people's right and duty, that's not a direct quote, to alter or abolish such governments and erect those that will do this, okay? I apologize for my horrible recollection of the exact wording. It's much better than Joe Biden's, attempt at quoting the Declaration of Independence, I'll tell you that. Um, we've got an article, the Articles of Confederation, which is not actually doing such a good job. So in order to form a more perfect union, they create a new Constitution of the United States. This Constitution, if we look at the reasoning behind it, is geared to do what? Secure the rights of man. Now, what does it mean to say secure? It means it's to protect the rights, not establish the rights. You do not have rights because it's written in the Bill of Rights. One of the biggest debates over the Bill of Rights was whether or not people would believe that by putting a Bill of Rights at the end of the Constitution, amending it, right, that people would believe that these are your only rights, and that in order to enter into a constitution would mean giving up your rights, and that, oh, we'll amend it and say, here are the rights you can have. That was a big fear. That's not the case. Your rights exist and they cannot be taken away, and that is the notion of inalienability, something that cannot be alienated, something that cannot be taken away. And so the Bill of Rights were merely to express certain rights, to highlight them, because those were the ones that seemed to be the most important and the most egregious that had been violated in the past. Now let's talk about some of that. What would some of those rights be? Freedom of religion, freedom of what? Speech, freedom of the press, okay? The right to bear arms, right? Why would we want to bear arms?
To protect ourselves.
From what?
Anyone who tries to take our life.
Anyone who tries to take our life. That is very good, and that's good. Go ahead.
One that tries to take your rights.
Right, so here we go. It's a defense against tyranny. It's a defense against the government. It's a check on the government by the people, that if you bear arms, that the government will not be able to violate you. Can you imagine? Look, just imagine this. Let's just take the slave trade. Now, first of all, the slave trade, like I told you last lecture, is historically a human thing that has gone. We are the first culture in the world to abolish the slave trade. America inherited it from the world. Okay, there's not been a culture prior to this that did not practice slavery, and America abolished it. We should be proud of that, even if we are not perfect. Okay, but we should at least say, okay, the rest of the world practiced it, kept it, and we abolished it, and now it has caught on worldwide. I think that's something we should be proud of. But imagine the slave trade, if what it would be like to try to enslave an armed group of people. Okay, part of the North American slave trade relied on the fact that those who enslaved had better technology. Okay, guns over those they enslaved. So imagine an armed group of people. It's a lot harder to enslave an armed group of people, is it not? And tyrannize them, to violate their rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's a much easier thing to do if you take away their right to bear arms. Now, a lot of people are like, yeah, you shouldn't have guns. Is there anybody, it's okay if you don't want to have a gun. And I also understand that the theory behind getting rid of them, because you go, if we got rid of all the guns, there'd be no what? Gun violence, correct? Right, and if you made marijuana illegal, there'd be nobody smoking marijuana. Oh wait, marijuana is illegal, and a lot of people smoke marijuana, right? I highly doubt that getting rid of the guns or making guns illegal will get rid of guns. I can promise you that, okay? It may get rid of gun manufacturers, legal gun manufacturers, but the gun trade will still exist, I can promise you that, and probably a lot more dangerous. So the Second Amendment, that you can tell, see there you go, a little bias by your professor. Clearly I'm a pro Second Amendment guy, right? but you know, it's in the Constitution. It's amendment. They found it important enough to put there, right? Due process. Should there be a process through which the government has to prove your guilt if they're going to charge you? Like, if I say something, if I make a claim, is it not my obligation to prove my allegations? Right. And if the government's going to do so, should they not, especially before they take away your liberty, should they not also have to be obligated to prove your guilt? And if they are unable to prove your guilt, not you prove your innocence, should they not be able to lock you up per se, unless they actually prove that you did something? Right. Okay, good. So the Bill of Rights is important, don't get me wrong, but it is not the only rights you get. And the point I want to make is that you do not have your rights because the Bill of Rights gives you those rights. Those rights are written down because you have those rights. A big deal right now is freedom of the press. What counts as the press? Who gets to say what over the internet? You know, who gets to cancel it out? Who gets to say you're not allowed to say that? Do you have free speech? And if you're a journalist, do you have a right to say stuff through the act of journalism? To publish ideas? Does the government have a right, or do companies who own the internet, Jeff Bezos, okay, do they have a right to say you cannot say these things and shut you down? You say, no, you don't have a right, or no, they don't have a right to shut you
They
down.
don't have a right to shut you down.
It's an interesting thing because you got private property, right? But when they have a monopoly like they do, so Jeff Bezos owns all the servers basically, right? And all the servers is where you put all the information. So Facebook puts its platform on his servers, right? You upset Jeff Bezos, he could kick you off his servers. Well, that's what happened to Parler. Who knows what Parler is? Parler was like Twitter, but a bunch of conservatives were on it. They were leaving Twitter. And Twitter and Facebook got together, went to Jeff Bezos, said, we got to get rid of these guys. And Jeff Bezos, basically, Parler got kicked off of the servers. Now they were saying, you're spewing a bunch of hate and and violence and stuff like that. The counter argument to that was, no, that's what's going on Facebook against us. And then you kicked us off of Facebook, so we made our own. And then when we went there, now Bezos says, yeah, you can get your own car, but you're not going to drive it on my highway. Okay? So you go, well, Bezos owns the highway. Should he be able to tell you how to drive? Let's just put this, let's imagine the American road systems. Imagine if one group owned all the roads and said, you can buy a car, but you're not going to drive it on my highway. If you want to drive, you'll have to create your own roads. Could you imagine the difficulty in that, right? And that's kind of what we're looking at right now with the internet. There's a monopoly going on. And so you go, well, who has the rights? Does Jeff Bezos have the rights because he owns it? It's his private. Well, there obviously you could invest in this stuff, which I have. I've invested in Google. I mean, but those who control Google control what they do with Google and how it acts. So we're in a really interesting constitutional situation here. And there's a reason why they break up monopolies, right? Because they can also violate people's rights. So does the government, if the government is there to secure your rights, can it break up a company such as Amazon, who owns all of the servers, which is primarily owned by Jeff Bezos, right? I think he stepped down as CEO or something like that, but just recently. But can they break them up? And the answer is yes, they can. The question then is, will they break them up? And it depends on the politics of the day. If it's in their political interest, the political interest of the majority, then maybe, yeah, they will. But unfortunately, the political interest of the majority right now is to keep those guys in power, right? Okay. So what does the Constitution of America do, the United States Constitution do that the Articles of Confederation didn't do? It strengthens the federal government. Okay, now this was not something that the states were all big fans of. Nobody likes giving up power, but they needed to. They needed the power to not just legislate, but to enforce laws. So they needed a strong executive branch of government. They needed a strong executive branch of government because they couldn't enforce anything under the Articles of Confederation. They could tax, but they couldn't collect. So this served to fix the holes in the holy bucket of the Articles of Confederation, and it gave strength to the federal government. So what is our federal government? Let's first start by talking about the branches of any and all governments, and I'll move this over here instead. Last time we met, I put down the different types of government, and I gave you the just and the unjust. And the first one was monarchy, Jason. And Jason, monarchy is the just rule of the how many?
One.
One, yes. And a tyrant is the what?
The unjust of one.
The unjust rule of the one, okay? And then we had aristocracy, aristocrats, is the just rule of the few, whereas oligarchy, and we talked about this, where I suggested the rule in America right now is going towards a technocracy, where the technocrats like Zuckerberg, Bezos, the guy from Google, and Jack Dorsey from Twitter, that they have so much authority over the information that we get on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute basis, and even our products and the ability to make use of their servers and stuff, that they have a lot of power, and that we can almost call them oligarchs at this point, where they have so much authority that, like I said, they could cut the president of the United States off from their platforms, and they did. They cut Donald Trump off of Twitter, off of any ability to communicate with those people who actually support him. And so they shut him down. And so you could say, is that if that is unjust, they could do that to the current president, right? And what's to stop them? Except for that they might like him, or that he's on their side for now, right? Because just don't let Joe Biden cross them, and perhaps they may cancel him too. So the unjust rule of the few. Now there are countries, and I mentioned like Russia has some oligarchs, highly powerful individuals there, generally run by Putin, but they call it an oligarchy because these guys are unjust. They're corrupt, and they take advantage, and they violate the rights of the population. So anyway, now we've got the third one, which is the just rule of the many. And who can name that one? Okay, it's polity. Some of you might have been thinking democracy, right? And if you were, you would have, Aristotle called democracy the tyranny of the masses, the unjust rule of the many. Because the belief is that most people are, weird. Oh, this thing sucked off the back. I'm like jamming this thing, trying to shut it, ruining my mark. The idea is that most people just aren't that bright. And it's not that they're not bright. The majority of people are not that virtuous. Okay? Imagine laziness, we call it sloth in philosophy. Okay? Imagine that vice. People are lazy, and you start as a politician, you say, you vote for me, and you'll not have to work. I'll give you free money. A universal income. Have you heard of that? You have heard of it?
Oh, like I understand the concept, but
There are politicians right now that said, if you vote for me, I will get you a universal income. That is, you don't even have to work for it. I'm going to take from those who work and give it to those who do not work, and you'll be able to spend that money, right? And not even have to work. Okay, fine. That's kind of like buying votes, but okay. That is preying off of the masses' vice of laziness, that they don't want to work for that which they get. And so the tyranny of the masses, they may go, well, I don't want to work, man. I'm going to vote for this guy. And because there are so many people who are lazy, that they will vote that in. Or how about we want to vote for the legalization of drug use because, you know, it's all about pleasure. And, and so that's a problem, because then you could vote in really bad laws. You know, when you can vote for free money, that is a bad thing, because what happens when you vote for free money?
Taxes are higher.
For those who work, right? And then what happens when you run out of their money?
They get mad.
Huh?
They get mad, maybe?
Then everybody's broke. There's no more money to redistribute. Moreover, if nobody's working, then nobody's producing. And what do you get when you're not producing anything? That's right, you get nothing. And so you get shortages. So in Russia, what they had, there were these great shortages in Russia during the Cold War, because the guys would put on paper that they had produced so many goods, right? And they would, because they'd get a little bump in pay maybe. And then, the manager, if he had got his factory to make this many things, he would get a bump in pay if he made that much. So he'd bump them up, they'd all bump up, and on paper, it all looked like they were producing all these goods when in reality they were not. And so one of the things that happened in the Soviet Union is you'd be walking down the street and you see a line at a store and you go, oh, I better get in line at this store. You don't even know what they're selling at the store. All you know is that they may have something, because the shelves were empty, because nobody was producing. And why was nobody producing? Because they had there was no benefit to producing more, really. As long as you put it on paper, you got your paycheck. Okay, so because they couldn't own their own businesses, because they couldn't reap the fruit of their own labor, they just didn't work. It bred laziness. And so they had shortages. And so let's say you start giving free money away, people stop working, people stop producing, people stop producing, there's nothing to consume. And that includes food. There's a lot of starvation in Soviet Union. Anyway, so the unjust rule of the many to Aristotle is democracy. That is the tyranny of the masses. You don't want that. You don't want tyranny of the few. You don't want it of the one. The biggest problem here is with the one is when there's one person in charge, things happen really quickly, for good or bad. Go ahead, sir.
Tyranny, what is tyranny?
Tyranny is unjust rule. It's usually through force and fear. Okay? So a tyrant who runs things will just generally run roughshod over the rights of those he or she serves, and they hold their countrymen hostage through military force. It's usually fear of imprisonment. You look at what's going on in North Korea. The family, Kim Jong-un is the dictator there, and if you speak out against Kim Jong-un, you'll disappear. Okay, political prisoners in China, there are many of them. They go to jail for speaking out against Xi Jinping. And then you have even there's a cartoon floating around the internet of him as Winnie the Pooh because he looks like Winnie the Pooh. And and so they cut that off, and if you print that, put that on your website, they'll pay you a visit, take you away in cuffs, you know. So you got tyranny, you know, the unjust rule, the violation of human rights, and it's either by one, a few, or many. Okay, if you have one person in charge, there is a good thing to be having only one person in charge, and that is things happen quickly. Okay, so if he has a good idea, he doesn't have to ask Congress, right? There's no opposition. He's in charge, and that's a good thing. However, if he's in charge and he's going to go say, hey, let's go kill all the Jews, Hitler, well, guess what? Who's going to stop him? He's in charge. All right? That's the problem. You put all the power in the hands of one, that's a recipe for disaster. You put all the power in the hands of the many, it can be painful too, because people in general are not the wisest of, I mean, right now you are taking a class on government, but I mean, imagine people who haven't yet and who just kind of sleep through the class, people who are philosophically, religiously untrained, have no moral virtue at all, and then all of a sudden what? They go vote, and do they know what they're voting for, who they're voting for? There are a lot of people right now voting for communism, socialism they call it, in America. Is that a good thing? It's killed hundreds of millions of people throughout the history, the last 100 years, right? Hundreds of millions of people are dead due to that political system, and now we're in America and people are trying to revive that here in America and turn us into a socialistic country. And you ask the people, you go, do you even know what this is? And they're like, yeah, it's, you know, rich versus poor, and it all sounds great on paper, but then you get it down the road and you know, rolling tanks through the street. Go ahead, sir.
Isn't there like a big difference between socialism and communism?
Is there? What's USSR stand for? One of the S's was Socialist Republic, right? Okay, it's either the Soviet Socialist Republic or the Socialist Soviet Republic, either way. What's the difference? Well, I'll tell you what. We in America have what's called a mixed economy, okay? It's not fully privatized, and it's not fully owned by the state, okay? So we have private ownership here. To the degree you make things more and more socialist, the government takes over the private industries more and more, if that makes sense. So in a communist country such as, you know, in the USSR, they have what's called a command economy, where the government owned all of the resources for building, and you were not allowed to own your own private business, okay? Everybody's a government employee. Now that sure as heck stifles any kind of motivation to create anything, correct? And so now what ends up happening is, what's going on in America is there's this, the socialists here want to take over certain industries, the major industries, and I suggest you watch this documentary called The Commanding Heights, okay? They want to take over the commanding heights of the economy, and they want to move us towards a command economy. And in doing so, that's taken us towards communism. So when you hear somebody saying we're progressives, you always have to ask the question, where are they progressing to? What is the end of the progression to where they say we have gotten there? Well, it's when they actually control all the resources for the production and distribution of goods and services, and that the government can control these things in order to engineer what they believe to be the ideal society, utopia, okay? Now, so what do they want to do? They want to take away, repeal the Second Amendment. Well, it's taking away your power in case they become tyrants. They want to take over the energy industry. That is, they want to dictate how and what type of energy you use. They'll use global warming and stuff like that as a pretense to do it. They'll use the pandemic to help them take over healthcare. okay, to where you don't make your own healthcare choices anymore, all right? And we could just, I'm sure there are better people who could talk about this at a more specific level to what degree they want to take over the different industries in our economy, okay? But I can guarantee the socialists that we're talking about right now, they want it all, okay? They want it all. They want to tell you when you can worship, when you can't worship. They'll tell you what type of worship you can have and what type of worship you can't have. They'll tell you what kind of speech you can have, what type of speech you cannot have. Have you heard of hate speech before? Right. What is hate speech? Well, any speech I don't like, okay? And if I have the power to keep you from saying it, I'll use it. Well, anyway, let's go back in time to the creation of our government coming from tyranny. These are the types of government, and in any government there are really three branches, three things. You've got the legislative branch, which does what? It creates laws, it legislates, okay? It creates laws. Now laws are either what? Just or unjust. Okay? Just because it is the law doesn't make it just. It makes it a law, but it could be an unjust law. The law tells me I can do what? X, we'll call it. The question is, should the law let me do X? Or should the law keep me from doing X? And how do you determine that? Well, you do it through the natural law is one way. You ask the question, do I have a natural right to this? There's a law that says I need to be put to death at age 48 because we're overpopulated. Has anybody seen the show Logan's Run? Old 70s show where the earth was becoming overpopulated. They believed that the world was going to become overpopulated, okay? And so they had this dystopia movie about dystopia. That's bad society. Utopia is good society. Dystopia is bad society. And so where you had to turn yourself in at age 35 to be killed, euthanized, good death, right? Because to prevent overpopulation. And Logan and a couple of friends decide, yeah, screw this, we're running, okay? And Logan's run. So they're trying to get away and get outside of that society so that they could survive. And the idea is they run across a guy who's old. They're like, oh my God, you're old. You got wrinkles on your face. Okay? Is that a good law or a bad law? It is the law. You have to turn yourself in to be euthanized. How would we judge it? By the natural law, all humans have a right to life. Okay? All right. So the legislative branch creates laws which are either just or unjust. Then you have the executive branch. The executive branch does what? Executes the law, enforces the law, makes the law work. Okay? Now, there's some powers that the executive branch has. Are we out of time? How much time do we have here?
It's 8:57.
And what time is this class at?
9:15.
Yeah, because we only meet twice a week. That's right. Okay. And then finally you have the judicial branch. Now the judicial branch does what? Judges the law. Judges two things, actually. It judges whether or not the person or the act or whatever violated the law. But the judicial branch could also judge the law itself. And the judicial branch could judge whether the law is constitutional or unconstitutional, just or unjust. Keep in mind the Constitution exists to secure the rights of man. It's assumed that that which is contained within the Constitution is there to what? Preserve the rights of man. Therefore, If it is constitutional, if the law is constitutional, meets that standard, then it should be upholding the rights of man and not violating them. Now, each one of these branches, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, they all will interact with one another in such a way as to have provide what are called checks and balances upon one another. So the legislative branch could create a law. It doesn't follow that the executive branch has to execute the law. Okay? In fact, the executive branch can veto that legislation, that law. The legislative branch can create a law. The president, the executive branch, could sign it into law, and then the judicial branch could say, no, that's an unjust, unconstitutional law, and make it null and void. All right? So there are checks and balances to protect your rights from unjust laws, from a tyrannical government. Now, if every government has all three of these things, you ask the question, where do you want to vest this authority? Do you want to put all the lawmaking, law executing, and law judging power into the hands of one, a few, or many? Where do you want it? If you guys are going to make your own, last week we were talking, Jason, as though, hey, what if we were all in an island and there's about 100,000 of us? It gave us a round number of that, right? And I said, how are we going to rule ourselves? First, we'd have to create a constitution, a set of rules, right? That's going to be hard to do, to get 100,000 people to agree on it, but you know, you figure it out. Let's pretend we somehow figure it out. Sometimes it might just take power. It might take a war. My faction's going to kick your faction's butt. We're going to make you submit to us. And then we are going to create a constitution, all right? How's that? Okay, sounds good. And in that constitution, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the lawmaking process. We're going to discuss the execution of those laws. Then we're going to discuss the judging of those laws and people against those laws. All right? And that's what our constitution is going to do. It's going to set the rules of how we're going to do such things, of these things. And we're going to decide who is going to rule. Are we going to have one, a few, or many ruling? And we're going to have to argue over this. And maybe fight over it. And so, given our current situation right now in America, which is deeply divided over constitutional issues, what would you do right now? What do you think our remedy is to the problems facing America, given our Constitution, given how many rule, given how we have our Constitution set up? Do you have any input on that? I'm going to ask you guys, first let's start off by not picking a fight, but picking on somebody to see if we know if there are any fights in America going on right now. How about you, Suzical?
Well, I mean, you saw what happened, like, at the White House recently.
What happened there?
Like, pure chaos.
Yeah, that's chaos, but what? What's that?
It was, like, raided.
Was it?
Yeah.
Was it that bad?
It was pretty bad.
A couple of people died. I know that. That's bad.
Yeah.
Who did it?
According to the government.
According to the government? Which government?
No, I don't know, but apparently it was like majority Trump supporters, but I don't know if this is.
Well, I mean, there was 500,000 Trump supporters at a rally down the street.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it took some bit of time. So the rally's going on down the street. Trump is talking to his people, and he says, "I want you. We're going to march down there," and he says this, and I quote, "peacefully," right? And we're going to let them hear our voice, okay? Peacefully. Right? While he's saying that, there's a bunch of people being let into, at least the video footage shows me this, they're being let into the Capitol building by Capitol Police. And then there's a group of weird people, like this one guy called the QAnon Shaman, right? And he's got the horns and the painted chest, right? He's a failed actor out of Arizona. He's shown up at a bunch of Antifa and Black Lives Matters things, okay? He's been participating in that. And then you had other guys sitting there breaking windows and stuff, and some of those guys were part of Antifa, it was found out. And then you had a bunch of Trump supporters who were like, okay, well, we're just gonna walk in, they let us in, da-da-da. And they're like taking pictures. And then a bunch of people get arrested. Now somebody got shoved, this woman shoves herself through the door. She's kind of a weird lady. She apparently was in a, what is it called, a thruple? You know what a thruple is? She's not a couple, she's a thruple. So she and another woman were married to another dude, okay? Or they're married all to each other, okay? Anyway, she got shot and she died. I don't know how the security guy, the police officer died. I don't know how he died. Some believe one of them died from a heart attack there. Very stressful situation, okay? So yeah, it was kind of crazy. And you had people climbing up the scaffolds and other people yelling, hey, they're Antifa, they're not one of us. And you know, it's just kind of interesting. There's a lot of debate about who did it and who did what and who incited it, right? Now, Trump, the idea is Trump's getting, right now, he's getting impeached for inciting this thing. But, of course, the timeline is a little weird because it's happening while he's giving the speech, and it's like a 10-minute walk from where the speech was, right? And so these people aren't like, hey, listen up, okay, he's inciting us now, all right, oh yeah, let's go. No, okay. I'm very suspicious about the whole incitement thing, as you can tell. But it was a kerfuffle, okay? A lot of people were there. I watched it on TV, and it really destroyed what was supposed to be going on in that legislative session, okay? They're supposed to be examining things about the election because there's a belief that the election was stolen. And what ended up happening is that ended up stealing the ability to make that claim. What else is going on? There's a lot of other things. You go to Portland, you got Antifa destroying the streets of Portland. You know, Washington, they're big out there. What do you think's going on? Anything interesting in our world?
I mean, the whole pandemic is like.
Yeah, look at you in a mask and all, and you in a mask, and all of us in a mask except for me. 6 feet away. Should you have to wear a mask? You say yes?
I say yes. I mean,
Why?
it doesn't harm you. It's just,
How do you know it doesn't harm you? I can't see your face. You're depersonalized. You're no longer a person. I can tell you're smiling under there, but I mean, go ahead, sir.
Well, I think we should protect the others, like even if we don't think we have to, because I had it already, and I was like, it was the sickest I've ever been in my life. I
Yeah.
thought I was gonna die.
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it? My dad did die of it.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Well, but then we have to ask the question though. Do the masks work?
I don't know.
We don't know, actually. That's the sad thing, is because we got conflicting evidence scientifically. So we don't know. I wear my mask generally. I'm not doing it for the lecture, but I always wear my mask if I walk in, out, you know, go into private places. I do for respect. For now, for respect. But should the government force this upon you?
I don't think necessarily force, but I think like as a person, you should just respect like others around you and take into consideration that you don't know if you do have it or you don't. Some people don't get symptoms.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, but that's consideration. I mean, we should be considerate.
Mm-hmm.
But should the law enforce consideration?
I don't think so, because it's America.
Even though
But
you've had it and it was the sickest of your life. And you've been pretty sick before, ever? Have you ever had the flu?
yeah, I'm pretty sickly.
Yeah, okay.
But I
So,
haven't,
so
like, that was like when I was growing up, and like as I've gotten older, I haven't gotten really sick.
yeah.
But I was like in the bed for a week.
Yeah, I bet it's horrible. Like, I have friends that they had virtually no symptoms. My dad, he died. You, different. Another friend of mine just got it. He was pretty sick. I'll ask him, this will be the first, I'll see him Sunday for the first time in a couple weeks. He'll report to me how he felt. What do you think? Should we enforce this stuff? Is it your right to walk around without a mask on your face?
I mean, I feel like it's your right, but at the same time.
If it's your right and the government's forcing, is that not a violation of rights?
I guess so.
I mean, if you have a right and they're making you do it, then that's a violation of rights.
Yeah, I guess.
So wouldn't the government have to justify their making you wear a mask? Due process, right? Now, I'm not suggesting I'm not saying we shouldn't be wearing masks. Like, as soon as this lecture's over, this mask's going on. And, you know, I'll walk past my colleagues and I'll have my mask on and I'll go in my office, I'll take my mask off, okay? Which is ironic, then most of you guys are gonna go home, take your mask off and hang out with all your friends, right? Most of you are not gonna be wearing your mask around your friends, are you? Right? Yeah, especially you've already had it. You're like, I'm not gonna give it to you, I had it, and I'm not gonna get it, I already had it, so. What about the needle, vaccination? What if the government says you have to get a vaccination? Should the government force vaccinations on you? What about your guys' religious rights? There's some religious groups that don't want to take vaccines. Did we talk about this the other day, vaccines the other day?
We touched on it.
Yeah, where the Tuskegee experiment, a lot of people in the black population don't want to take anything the government's making, because the last time they did it, the last time they trusted government, they infected them with syphilis and did human experimentation on them. Violated their rights grossly, and so there's deep distrust in the black community for the government over such issues. Understandably so. Should these guys, and by the way, there's the goal here is to keep people from being able to travel if you haven't got the shot. So unless you can prove you got the vaccine, you're not allowed to get on a plane or a bus, right? If you go to New Mexico, they have like a 2-week quarantine. You're supposed to quarantine yourself for 2 weeks before you can get out of anywhere you go. So when I went to go bury my dad in New Mexico, I was expected to, quarantine myself. Are we out? Almost. Thing is, the executive branch didn't have much enforcement power over it, and I went to the funeral anyway. Nobody could stop me. Point being is, where does the government overreach begin? All right? The Constitution is there to protect your rights, not to protect the government, okay? Now, the masks may, in a sense, help protect people's rights to life if they are actually working. Okay, but the burden of proof seems to be on whom? You, that they don't work, or on the government that they do? Due process says the government has to, if they're making the claim, they have to justify it. Remember that? Okay, let's close up this lecture. I put 3 videos up for you to watch. I think they're all very, very interesting. Okay, one's on the Articles of Confederation, one's on Shays' Rebellion, and the last one is that Hadley Arcus video on natural law and the Constitution. I think you'll like it, okay? That's the one I find the most valuable. Okay, have a great day.